The opening bell hasn't rung yet, but we've already started the transition. We know Pete Buttigieg is up for the DOT spot, and he's been meeting with leaders all across town, including AAAE. Now, I would expect that that would be normal. However, in a time when President-elect Biden has really pushed for an infrastructure package, that this is more important than ever. Money flowing to airports is hugely important, not only for jobs and things, but for the growth of aviation. I mean, runways, simple things like runways, are the biggest thing we can do to add capacity to the NAS. Mr. Buttigieg is the best known person going into DOT in probably at least 40 years. And that may give us a super powerful mouthpiece. But we've got to remember that airports, runways all need supporting ATC infrastructure to keep up. And airports don't provide radars, they don't provide ILSs, they don't provide DMEs, they don't provide VORs, and all those things have to be part of the budget to go along with it. We need a parallel effort that says keep funding this stuff. And if you look at the FAA's budget, it doesn't line up. It's all about efficiency tools and tweaking this and some things like weather, but without radars, it's not going to happen. It's not really going to work out for us. And certainly the infrastructure for electronic vertical takeoff and landing vehicles isn't coming forward because there's no vertiport AC. So the newest radar in the FAA's inventory is the ASR-11, and I came to Raytheon even at the tail end of when that implementation was happening. There are still ASR-8s and 9s long past their service life that are still in the system. It is time to refresh the necessary infrastructure, and although it might not be cool to go out and buy a radar and install it, it's absolutely necessary. It's absolutely necessary to go out and buy a VOR. From stats that I've heard from some of our clients, we as a country have the oldest VORs on the planet. And there may be an outlier here or there, but most people don't go past 15 years. They just go out and buy a new VOR. And our plan, the FAA's plan, is that we're going to have VORs that are over 100 years old before they get replaced. 100 years old. This isn't the time to think that the B-52 is the way to go. So I want to go down a rabbit hole with Mr. Buttigieg and his husband. They play a board game, Pan Am. And I think that's pretty cool. $24 on Amazon, you build an airline and you compete globally with Pan Am. Hey, guy who's doing that is going to have aviation on his mind, and maybe he'll have some empathy for what we're going through and be a powerful voice for us to establish the necessary support that we're always looking for every year. Administrator Nixon is, I think, easily going to stay on for a long time, but he's not without his adversaries. There's people in Congress, including Mark DeSaulnier from California, that are calling for his removal. The word always comes up that Sully Sullenberg would be great, but this is an Instagram, kind of activity where it says, well, I see a pretty picture and therefore it's that's the right person, but he has nothing in his background that would say that he could do the job. And it's a $17 billion organization. You have to have some management skills. In Administrator Dixon's corner is NATCA. Patricia Gilbert, the NATCA Executive Vice President, says he's doing a fabulous job, and for the sake of stability, that it's very important that he stays in place. I don't really care too much about the stability of things. There's a job to be done. I think he's doing a fine job. He's got to get focused on the rest of the agency, which he has not done yet. So jury's a little bit out for me. But I don't see anything wrong with having a lifelong aviation advocate in the top seat. Also sure you know that Secretary Chow, she resigned, and after the attack on the Capitol, and every political appointee at the FAA also resigned. And so I don't think, the transition really is handled by career folks, the people in the offices that, develop the books, provide the information. And so I don't really see that there's going to be any change in the trajectory until other politicals kind of come into place. But just before Secretary Chow left office, she, of course, signed a few rules. One of them being authorizing supersonic flight over the domestic U.S. Sort of, but not really. Boom! It's a final rule that shows the right path so that you could safely get to that flight, but flight still isn't approved. And even Administrator Nixon had to walk that back a little bit, saying the testing of supersonic aircraft at Mach 1 or greater will be conducted only following the consideration of any impact to the environment. Well, with this rule, there were 208 comments, almost all of them related to the impact to the environment. So we'll see if this gets anywhere, and it would be kind of wild to build a supersonic aircraft and not be able to test it or fly it in the U.S. again. So kind of weird. In 208 comments, that isn't a whole lot for a rule. 50,000, over 50,000 comments were on the remote ID rule for UAS. So we'll see how this proceeds, but a lot of people needed to know how they could get to an appropriate path. Now that's done. Hey, not all of aviation collapsed during the pandemic. Commercial space operations set a new record. And since we were able to be at home working or semi-working and had the TV or live streaming on, we got to watch some of it through SpaceX and NASA. There were FAA licensed 41 commercial space operation, which is both launches and re-entries, which is the most of the agency's short history of licensing these kinds of things. But that also included 39 launches, including which actually launched, that means 2 didn't, but that included the first ever licensing of a NASA crew, which, if you recall, a few weeks ago I did comment about that the difference between that one and the one before was not just a beta test, but the paperwork was all in place. So there's a little bit of a caveat to this. So DoD launches a lot more than that every year, and they do it most of them in secret. And going back to the 60s, launches topped over 100 a year. But for 2021, this forecasting number of licensing of operations could be 50 or more. Now you start adding these more and more launches, and new regulations have been streamlined so that the approvals can be, if you can launch here, well, you can launch over here with the same approvals. You don't really have to ask and go through the drill. But so now that that door is wide open, with launches and re-entries actually taking up space, massive airspace shutdowns need to be anticipated. Hey, it's pretty easy when we had a COVID situation when no one was flying. But now you think of doing that, shutting massive airspace blocks down, moving around the country one time a week. That's like having a giant hurricane go through the country one time a week. I mean, that would be incredibly disruptive to traditional aviation. So programs on the near-term horizon like Space Data Integrator and Space Traffic Management become much more important than they were yesterday, and super underfunded as compared to other efficiency tools and some weather stuff that we see in the budget. Hey, a few months ago, Amazon was in the news receiving a Part 135 operation status for drone deliveries. But along with that, they had Part 135 for a Boeing 767 cargo aircraft. That was probably the real reason for that application. The drone stuff was just riding on the coattails. Hey, with passenger traffic down, really good time to buy a used, lightly used Boeing 767 that's parked in the desert, not making any revenue. So what'd they do? They bought 11 of these from 11 jets from Delta and WestJet. And the big picture is that that's just the beginning. Expect a brand new major airline here in the U.S. They'll have 11 airplanes that they own, and they expect to have 85 by the end of this year. Pretty amazing. So we'll see how that plays out. Hey, I'm sitting here in the sunset in Naples, Florida. I hope everybody gets their share of warm weather. Talk to you next week.